Awesome. All right. Well, welcome everybody to this afternoon session. This afternoon session will be on serving aging veterans. So I hope you're in the right place. I just want to remind everybody on the call who's in attendance today, you are muted, but you can still talk to us throughout the presentations by using your chat box. So I just want to make sure you guys are all aware of that. We will be saving a couple minutes at the very end for a Q&A. So if you have questions or comments as we go through presentations, please communicate with us that way. I wanted to remind everybody too who's in the audience, we will be sending out a recording of this session and the slides from this session in our daily conference email, which goes out every morning, sort of a recap of the day before during conference. So if we have links, or you want to go back and look at the slides, you will be receiving all of that. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our panelists for today for them to introduce themselves, and I'll be back at the very end for our Q&A.
Okay. Thank you, Jasmine, and hello, everyone. I am Molly French, the Director of Housing and Services Resource Center at the National Association of Area Agencies on Aging.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ashton Stewart, Navy veteran, first Gulf War, and I am the SAGE Vets Program Manager, which is a New York State program for older LGBT veterans.
Hola, I'm Janice Stringfellow, and I serve as the President and CEO of Volunteers of America, Florida.
All right, well, I'll go ahead and get us started. Thank you so much for coming to the session. I've been in aging for a while, and we have a strong preference for older adults and people with disabilities. Thank you so much for all that you do for our nation's veterans. Really appreciate that. Next slide. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about, next slide, the AAAs and Title VI programs. And these are funded through the Older Americans Act by the federal agency, the Administration for Community Living, to provide services to older adults. For AAAs, it's anyone 60 and better, and also for Native Americans through the Title VI programs, to provide a wide array of community services. They deliver, they coordinate, they fund, work with community partners so that older adults and others, including people with disabilities, can remain in their communities in safe, stable housing to the extent living, participating in the community, enjoying having opportunities for the health and well-being. AAAs and Title VI's programs do this by providing not only required services, but also by responding to community needs and priorities. And then in the next slide, you'll see that not only do AAAs and Title VI provide services to older adults, but among AAAs, according to our N4A survey, nearly 4 in 5 are also providing assistance to people living with disabilities who are younger than 60, and nearly half of AAAs also have assistance and programs for people living with dementia of any age. In the next slide, I want to focus more on veterans, and nearly 40% of AAAs, according to our survey, are providing services not only to older veterans, but to those who are younger than 60. And of the AAAs that do offer home modification and repair programs, nearly half of them have specifically identified veterans as a priority population. For Title VI programs, the vast majority, 70% of them, report having some type of partnership with the Veterans Administration, might be formal or informal. In the next slide, the Older Americans Act funds 5 core services that AAAs deliver. And by far, one of the biggest umbrellas is that on the far left, the supportive services category, where AAAs provide assistance, whether it's transportation, in-home services like chore services, legal assistance, case management is very important, information and referral. Some of the other 4 core services include home delivered meals or meals in senior centers or other congregate settings, evidence-based programs focused on health, whether it's falls prevention, arthritis, as well as diabetes self-care management. AAAs for caregivers for older adults and people with disabilities. The caregiver can be 18 years old. It doesn't matter. There are AAAs providing or arranging for programs and services to keep those caregivers resilient and skilled in providing care. And then AAAs are also looking after elder rights, particularly preventing elder abuse and serving as long-term care services ombudspeople. In addition, AAAs provide a wide array of services that are responsive to community priorities. Some of the more common types of these other services include adult day centers, emergency response, as well as personal care and assistance, just to name a few. In the next slide, please. Among these services are home modifications and repairs. And we know that older adults, people with disabilities are often on fixed incomes, and it is expensive to keep up a home or to make modifications for accessibility. And so what we're doing is that AAAs, nearly 61%, either directly provide those home modification or repairs or offer some type of assistance program with housing. For example, helping people find affordable housing or learn how to gain access to vouchers. In the next slide, you'll see that in addition, kind of on that accessibility and having housing that works for remaining in the community and living as independently as possible, many AAAs also provide transportation assistance. So 83% provide assisted transportation. So that might be from door to door. And not only to get to medical appointments, but also getting to the grocery store, to the bank, to the library, going to church or other community events to stay active. There is room for growth with 60% of AAAs offering wheelchair accessible transportation. In the next slide, I want to just have seed ideas for you about AAAs and Title VI programs as great partners for your COCs and for homeless service providers. Because they are in the community providing services and supports day in, day out, AAAs and Title VI have deep expertise in what is often thought of, but not necessarily, that's the case, quote unquote, geriatric conditions. So be it cognitive impairment or dementia, arthritis, trouble, having difficulty doing activities of daily living, hearing loss, falls prevention, dehydration, AAAs really understand both older adults and people with disabilities and know how to adapt services and supports to help meet their needs while recognizing their autonomy and providing person-centered care. They have strong networks throughout their communities, and they are really innovative about how to fill gaps so that older adults and people with disabilities can remain in the community in relatively stable situations and avoiding crises. I'm going to give you a few examples in the next few slides. And then the first one, in Northwest Ohio, the Area Office on Aging, which is the AAA, has been partnering with the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs and others to serve veterans who are living in permanent supportive housing. The AAA provided the land on the campus for that housing to be built. And then with the other partners realized that and heard from the veterans that they needed better access to nutritious food. To meet that need, the AAA pulled together community partners and began a Saturday brunch program where veterans not only get healthy food, but they're also having chance to socialize not only with each other, but with members from the community, as well as learn about what's going on in the community so that they can stay connected and go out and participate. In the next slide, I want to talk about Mountain Empire older citizens, where they realized that veterans, there were veterans in the community who had often had medical appointments, but trouble getting there because they didn't have transportation, a car, or a robust support network to help them get to their dialysis appointments, for example. Mountain Empire initiated a transportation assistance program that not only got people, whether they needed to be assisted leaving their home and getting inside the clinic or just the door-to-door, or assistance during the ride. So they provide that holistic transportation service, particularly for those medical appointments, helping people enjoy as much health and well-being, as well as having opportunities for community volunteers to serve. In the next example, in Utah, Bear River AAA joined with the Veterans and Health Administration around a common goal of wanting more veterans accessing the benefits and supports for which they are eligible. And so they work together, bringing together the strengths of the AAA network in Utah in terms of their community outreach, being a trusted source of information, being really facile with benefits, eligibility, and access and enrollment. But where the AAAs needed some additional assistance was in having that knowledge and resources at their fingertips about veterans benefits. So Bear River created a Train the Trainer program in partnership with the VHA, as well as a resource guide, so that all AAAs in Utah could have that veteran specialist. The next slide has my last example with the Area Agency on Aging in Phoenix, which responded when the Justice Center, a local nonprofit, reached out and wanted to offer a daytime shelter program for older adults experiencing homelessness. That could, and so they offered a daytime place where veterans and other older adults can get safely out of the heat, have a lunch that's brought in by the Salvation Army, do their laundry. And while they're there, the AAA has someone on site to provide those wraparound services, whether it's assistance transitioning to housing, legal assistance, getting wellness checks, as well as addressing other needs, benefits, enrollments for those older adults, get them on a path towards ending homelessness. Next slide, please. So as these examples show, the Aging Network, AAAs and Title VI and their partners, are already serving older adults and people living with disabilities and who are veterans. And they could be doing more to help form and nurture those partnerships. The Administration for Community Living, that the federal agency, is creating a new Housing and Services Resource Center to help form and grow those cross-sector partnerships. It will focus on helping aging, disability, and housing professionals connect with each other, gain access and tools and ideas and training to better serve older adults and help people with disabilities with transitioning into community settings or avoiding homelessness and aging in place. Next slide, please. So I'd love to hear and see the chat box light up with your suggestions of how the Resource Center could be helping you. We are all ears and want to be able to put together this Resource Center in a way that's going to be really useful and help you build out the good work that's already happening in your community. And the next slide. And I am so fortunate to have Janet Stringfellow, who's generously agreed while you're working on the chat to talk to you just about some of the partnerships that Volunteers of America in Florida have been doing with AAAs. And I'll turn over to you, Janet. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I think I can testify of the efficacy and the great services that you can find in the Area Agency on Aging. I have the opportunity to receive them as I was taking care of my mother firsthand. And I'll tell you how I landed there. We own and manage approximately 11 affordable housing buildings in the state for a total of 1,100 beds for seniors. There are many, many veterans that have been served through those buildings. And when the time came to become a caretaker for my mother, I checked with my staff because I felt as lost as any person who have no experience in social services. We all think that because we're in this field, we should be competent enough to navigate it. I have to tell you, I was lost. It was so specific. And I asked my colleagues in the field, how can we serve our seniors and the seniors veterans, and who's the best provider? And the Area Agency on Aging was the top. They said you need to call there first, and they will help you to navigate that journey. And sure enough, they were my north. Every time that I hit a dead end, I will call them back and say, you know, this worked, this didn't work, what's next, what else is available? And they were so accessible and they stretched so much for me. And I'm afraid I have to even confess that there were moments that I was in tears. So not only they provided me with their typical resource guide type of advice, but they were there for me. They became like my therapist at the moment when I was exhausted, I was confused and disheartened at times with the many hurdles. So that for me was a very humble journey to go through that taught me a lot of lessons. But the number one was call the Area Agency on Aging first. Whenever you have a senior veteran or a person that you need coordination of services, they are, in my opinion, the first point of contact. And I am extremely gratitude for what they have done for those that we serve, the thousands of veterans that we have served in the state of Florida, for my mom in particular. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Janet. And you know, AAAs love to serve, but they're busy. And so sometimes it may take reaching out to them. So as you kind of leave and we go on to the next presentations, I do want you to remember, have a few takeaways, which is that AAA's and Title VI programs already serving veterans, often to help reduce crises, as well as just provide support for health and wellness. And they do work through partnerships. They're there, they have that expertise that complements yours. And as we come out of the pandemic and there are some new resources, this is a perfect time to strike up that conversation, reach out to them, and you can find your Title VI or your AAA by going to ACL's Elder Care Locator website and just typing in your zip code. And I'll put that into the chat after I'm done. Next slide. And I just invite you, I'm really excited and want to see through the chat what your questions are, happy to answer them, and also encourage you to just reach out to me after the conference. I want to hear what's going on in your world, if you have some great examples that we could be sharing, or how this Services Center could be helping you. Thank you again for all you do and for this opportunity to talk with you today.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Molly. That was a great presentation. My name is Ashton Stewart, and I am, again, the Sage Vets Program Manager, which is a New York State program for older LGBT veterans. Happy Pride Month to everyone. We are in the month of June. And I'm just thrilled to be taking part today in the National Coalition for Homeless Veterans Annual Conference, along with this esteemed panel. So thank you so much. And I also want to give a shout out to Wendy McClinton, the CEO of Black Veterans for Social Justice, who got me connected to NCHV. Very proud of our collaborative work and what we've been able to accomplish with BVSJ. So why am I here? Well, today's focus is equity in special populations. So I'm going to be talking about some of the issues that face older LGBT veterans. So yes, thank you, David. The first slide we've got here is a statistic. Nationally, there are an estimated 1 million veterans who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender LGBT. And this was cited in 2018 by the Hudson Valley VA. And in addition to that statistic, more than 36,000 LGBT service members are on active duty, and likely up to 87,000 are on or serving in the National Guard or reserves. Next slide, please. We're talking about this group because there are a lot of vulnerabilities here. One of the first unique challenges is that there's the issue of living alone for older LGBT adults. They don't have family to rely on. They're very isolated. They live with each other oftentimes for support and caregiving. And there's just a real vast history of discrimination that leaves a feeling of distrust for mainstream institutions. Can I have the next slide, please? And that, of course, results, it affects daily life from family to medical, to military, of course, to religious institutions, law enforcement, and housing. And next slide, please. And all of this culminates into higher incidents of suicide attempts and anxiety and depression and substance abuse. And when did all this start? Well, in the United States, the very first incident of distrust happened at Valley Forge in 1778. And it happened a few days, let me backtrack a little bit, a few years into the American Revolutionary War. This is when Lieutenant Frederick Gotthold Enslin became the very first US soldier who was court-martialed for being homosexual after he was found having sex with a private. His hearing was overseen by Aaron Burr, and his sentence was to be literally drummed out of the Continental Army by its regiments, fifes, and drums. In this ceremony, a soldier is forced to kneel. His sword is broken in half above his head, and he's forced to walk away as the drummers play a slow roll. Enslin was told never to return. Things did not get much better for the next 200 years. For anybody who was not cisgender and straight. Cisgender is, of course, a person whose personal identity and gender corresponds with their birth sex. Next slide, please. Don't ask, don't tell. 1993 through 2011. This was a compromise that the president, at the time, President Clinton, came up with his administration and government for ending the military's policies that criminalized same-sex relations that officially began in the 1940s. At the end of World War II. The person here in this picture, some of you may recognize this person, it's William von Steuben. And he is the Prussian nobleman who helped save the American Revolution. In 1778, George Washington designated William von Steuben as the Inspector General of the American Continental Army and put him in charge of training the troops. Von Steuben's military strategy was so highly admired that he authored the regulations for the order and discipline of the troops of the United States that was enacted by Congress and served as the US Army's official training manual for 33 years. Why am I sharing this? I'm sharing this because William von Steuben was also known for his preference of having the company of young men. Although that did not matter to George Washington nor the entire Continental Army, who were enamored by Steuben's leadership and military know-how. And interestingly, Lieutenant Frederick Enslin, who I mentioned earlier in this presentation, who was drummed out of the Army, that happened just 16 days after von Steuben arrived at Valley Forge. And I've often wondered how this affected him personally. LGBT service members continued to be disallowed from serving until 2011 when Don't Ask, Don't Tell ended. There were over 114,000 discharges for sexual orientation and gender identity between World War II and 2011. And a lot of these veterans reside in New York State. There are also a lot of LGBT older adults in your state, some of whom may be watching today and part of the audience. But SAGE, which is the nation's oldest agency dedicated to improve lives of older LGBT adults, recognize that there is a need for LGBT veterans over the age of 50. We're the only program like this in New York State. And can I have the next slide, please? New York State has taken our work and helped us out tremendously with a bill called the Restoration of Honor Act, which we were involved with and just kind of giving our input on the work we do when they were creating this bill that was actually first sponsored by Senator Brad Hoylman. They wanted to give a second chance to anybody who was discharged for sexual orientation or gender identity to gain access to New York State veteran benefits by sharing their side of the story with the State Division of Veterans Services. When they asked us about this, when they're formulating the language, we shared with them that there's oftentimes a secondary issue that is the actual result of result of the discharge that is secondary to the discrimination and bad treatment that they had because they were gay or LGBT. So we encourage them to include all other than honorable discharges rather than just other than honorable discharges for sexual orientation and gender identity. But the middle ground here for the negotiation was that they included military sexual trauma, PTSD, and TBI, which was huge. It welcomes a lot more people who aren't just LGBT, as people who have been discharged for reasons that they can explain, and they have a side of the story that wasn't necessarily heard when they were discharged by the military. Military justice is different, of course, than civilian court. So since that happened, we were the second state to pass a bill like this. Rhode Island was the first. But since last year, when the governor signed it into law, February this year, Colorado signed their own version of Restoration of Honor Act. And currently, we've got Connecticut looking into their own version, California, New Jersey, and Illinois. And what this is doing is putting more pressure on the federal government to make the change for those discharged for these reasons at that level. So we're really excited about the progress that we're seeing with this. We've been able to help get some veterans their benefits restored at the state level. And we're going to continue doing this. Can I have the next slide, please? I want to break down a bit of the stigma faced by transgender individuals. As you can see from the slide, it is really high. It's staggering. It's bad enough for LGBT people, but the transgender community has so much more stigma, and it's pretty terrifying. The National Center for Transgender Equity estimates that there are about 134,000 transgender veterans. And transgender veterans, in addition to these terrifying statistics, they also have reported suicidal thoughts disproportionately compared to that of other veterans and the general population. And this has been studied recently. Next slide, please. To try to overcome this stigma, Sage Vets does its best to get the stories out there. Renee Imperato is a proud transgender woman who lives in New York and has been fighting for the rights of others since the end of her enlistment, a very active member in the Black Lives Matter movement, a very active member in advocating for 100% healthcare for all veterans. And so just this last month, Senator Hoylman nominated Renee, and she is now in the New York State Veterans Hall of Fame. We also helped connect a veteran to the conference who will be sharing her story about being homeless and how that affected her and how it was so hard for her to get the proper type of housing. So that will be taking place Friday. So hopefully some of you will be able to hear Robin's story. Next slide, please. Getting to the housing piece of this, Sage Vets is part of a care management program at Sage. Sage is a national organization, and they have a national LGBT housing initiative, which is a pretty new thing for us, but it's super exciting. It's for all older adults who are all struggling with affordability, or quite often struggling with affordability. But for LGBT older adults, it's also finding a place that's welcoming, where they can feel free to be themselves and treated respectfully and compassionately. While our national LGBT elder housing initiative is addressing this with 5 key components of action. One is building housing, changing policy, educating consumers, expanding services, and training providers and community organizations and housing developers nationwide on the needs of LGBT elders. LGBT affirming elder housing is a growing national model serving a swiftly growing market. LGBT affirming means that it's housing that provides a welcoming environment with community peers and allies, often including voluntary, culturally competent services with affordability taken into account. And Sage has actually developed 2 new residences that you will see here in this picture. And these are the first LGBT-friendly housing structures in New York City. We've got one in Fort Greene, Brooklyn, and we've got a new one that is just gone up in the Bronx and Crintona Park. And each residence has a SAGE center on the ground floor and a provision of culturally competent care management. That's part of our care management program to address physical, mental, and social health needs of the residents as they age. We also have many veterans living in these structures. Robin, who's going to be speaking to the group in the conference on Friday, lives in one of them. Sage Vets started out as a very small program with just me as a full-time employee. It started in 2014. I joined Sage in 2018. There's not a lot of programs like this in the nation. I've actually done presentations in the Delaware Valley. There's nothing like Sage Vets in that area. But the needs of Sage, of older LGBT veterans are unique because they served during a time when there were policies that permitted discrimination to occur. In fact, LGBT veterans have historically been criminalized, and then they were banned from speaking freely about who they are during the Don't Ask, Don't Tell years. And now they're legally protected since 2011, and only since January for transgender veterans, because the trans ban was put back in place for a couple of years with the previous administration. So there's a lot of veterans out there that need this kind of help. Sage addresses their needs by sharing stories, because oftentimes people will hear a story and say, hey, that happened to me too. You know, I'm going to reach out. I'm going to wear that identity as a veteran, which is something that older LGBT veterans struggle with. Some are not open about being LGBT and also really conflicted about identifying as a veteran. The stories that I hear are horrendous oftentimes, and heroic at the same time. Some of the stories that I hear of the patriotism and the commitment to their country and to the flag go well beyond anything I could imagine. And then on top of that, there's a layer of just complete discrimination, disregard for who they are. So last year we gave 43 legal referrals, 9 legal victories, and we're going to keep pushing and doing everything we can. Yes, on Saturday, the VA announced that they're going to once again offer gender confirmation surgery, which ended in 2013. And the reason that they're doing that is to address the fact that suicide ideation with transgender veterans is so high. They want to do something. They want to give the community something back to try to address this need. Housing is another issue. Fortunately, it's not something that I hear about too tremendously often, but I'm very comforted by the fact that Sage is taking this step to do this national initiative. If there are questions, I'm happy to answer. Thank you again to everybody, Jasmine, David, and to Cindy Borden for inviting me to be here today.
All right. Thank you, Ashton, for all that you have accomplished and for that amazing advocacy. That's very impressive. And I know we are still part of this marathon, right? It's not the sprint. It's going to be a long journey, but thanks to great partners like you, I think we're making progress. So I am very impressed. So thank you. Thank you for that. Well, as I mentioned, I serve with Volunteers of America of Florida. We are a national organization or a national movement, as we like to call ourselves. I always share a disclaimer that this number above me here is that we are 125 years old. That's not my age, it's the organization. So we've been around for over a century, serving the most vulnerable in our states and in our nation. And that includes our senior homeless veterans, which is hard always to think that we can use those two words together, right? Homeless and veterans. And in this case, seniors, which is even harder to visualize. We are a social service organization that is also a developer of affordable housing. So that's a big part of what we do. But we always clarify that the housing is really for us a place to heal, where people can have a decent place to bring their family or themselves or the spouses, and then for us to be able to provide the necessary support services to cater to our homeless veterans and their families. Some of the information that I would like to highlight is, for example, in Florida only, we have at any given time over 100,000 veterans. It's easier, if you want to call it easy, to be a homeless veteran in the state of Florida than any state up north because of weather. That's part of the reality. Plus also, Florida has been known for being an aging state, again, because of our weather and some of the offerings, right, that are attractive to the aging population. So part of what we try to do is to make sure that our veterans have safe and decent environment via the affordable housing offerings that we have, but more importantly, the support services that we offer in place in that area to heal. We also try to complement our offerings in the arena of support services with training, education, and employment, and also case management, which includes all the behavioral health components. And just to give you an idea, we own and manage, as I mentioned, 11 buildings with approximately 100 seniors, and a lot of them are veterans. Also, in our special needs categories across the state, we serve a lot of homeless veterans. And one thing that became very obvious to us is that the aging homeless veterans population have very similar needs and DNA than the other special needs population that we serve, that is struggling with mental illness, substance abuse, more recently the opioids. I always share that once we had a fire in one of our seniors building, and we could not believe the amount of alcohol that was in their apartment. And these are independent living apartments. And then we kind of like hit ourselves in the face and said, of course, depression, anxiety, self-medication. We always think about the other homeless population, and we tend to neglect that our aging homeless veteran population continue to fight those fights. So that's why we continue to find and look for great partners in our communities that will help us add to the offerings that we provide our homeless veterans. We are committed to ending, like probably the rest of you, homelessness for men and women in our state and probably at the national level too. Our programs are scattered across the whole state of Florida, from Pensacola to Key West. We are the biggest provider of transitional housing for homeless veterans in our state. And at the national level, among the other affiliates that are serving our nation, we're pretty much there too. So we're very passionate about the veterans. It's one of the biggest groups that we serve. And as they're aging, we continue to try to cater to their specific needs that they might be struggling with or they might need. I think we all have talked about, or you know that I'm speaking to the choir, probably preaching to the choir, because I know among our participants, we have great providers of housing for our homeless veterans. So as we go to the next slide, I just want to highlight some of the other services that you probably know. It's the previous one, before that one. There we go. That most of you already offer. And you know some of the acronyms, but I'll try to be decent and spell them out. Besides the housing, the case management, we also provide the supportive services for veterans and their families, the famous SSVF. They are designed to provide temporary and supportive services for low or no income veterans and their family. And they kind of promote housing stability through the assistance of these support services. We also provide a lot of the case management. We're very strong about that, and about catering with life plans. We move away from the treatment plans modality. We want our veterans to be engaged in the design of the next years in their life. And that takes intense case management services that we design with them. And then under the umbrella of training, education, and employment services, we have also the famous Homeless Veterans Reintegration Program, famous HVRP. Some of you are providers of that. That program is excellent to help remove the barriers and assist them with the necessary work-related resources for them to get back into the employment world, part-time, full-time, or back in education. It's also a great program that demands very tangible results. If you host an HVRP program You know that those outcomes that you have to report quarterly are very powerful, and they help us to tell the story of what's the need out there within our aging homeless veterans, and also how are we doing, if we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. So those three are at the top of some of the offerings available, not only to the regular veterans, but for the aging ones. There are a lot of aging or seniors people, including veterans, that cannot afford to retire when they pass the 62 or 65 mark. So you'll be surprised how much we do in terms of helping them to be reemployed in ages that we never thought people were still looking for jobs. So as we transition to the next slide, I would like to pause and share some additional offerings that we are expanding to as we try to cater to specifically this time our aging veterans. You know that we'll talk a lot about the PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, among our veterans, and we all have been trying for years to cater and to continue to expand our offerings. So our organization has been taking the lead in an additional resource and model to tackle some feelings of guilt and some emotional distress that might overlap with PTSD, but they were not totally addressed within PTSD services and training. And it's called moral injury. Eventually, I will include in the chat box the specific link if you want to know more information about it. But I would like to pause here and share with you a little bit about what's the definition of moral injury and what are we doing about it. And I don't like to read much, but in this one, since I'm not the expert in this model, I would like to stick to this specific definition of it. Moral injury is the suffering people experience when we are in high stake situations. Things go wrong and harm results that challenges our deepest moral codes and ability to trust in others or ourselves. Their harm may be something we did, something we witnessed, or something that was done to us. It results in moral emotions such as shame, guilt, self-condemnation, outrage, and sorrow. And if you have been the provider of um, case management or services to our veterans, you can see that probably most of the above have been experienced by our veterans. We have incredible experts. We have at least 3 nurses who, between them, they have provided hospice care for veterans, over 10,000. And they wrote a book about it, and they brought the lessons to us of when veterans are navigating the last stages of life, how some of that combat conflict or veteran service have been challenging their well-being and the guilt that they have carried for many, many years. And these professionals are trying to release our veterans, especially the aging veterans, because this is very interesting in terms of when it becomes an onset. It's not immediately after discharge. Interesting enough, these challenges are coming as our veterans are aging and they might be experiencing some of those unfinished business or conflicts. And we have noticed that this treatment is really releasing and bring relief to many, many of our veterans. So I highly recommend it. I've been through the training myself, and we also have an opportunity for all of you, if you want to become trainers as well. We have the train the trainer format, and they come periodically, and it's free. I believe that actually ARP is sponsoring for the next year the training to any professional who would like to become also a professional within the moral injury. Within the moral injury umbrella, we have the REST program, that is Resilience Strength Time, and it's a free, confidential group process that supports emotional resilience in people struggling with isolation, fatigue, frustration, anxiety, and a sense of inadequacy or failure. And again, most of these feelings comes at the end of life or when we are in the later stages of our life. So I highly recommend it. It's a free line. I'll be posting the information in the chat box. You can also go to volunteersofamerica.org, and there's a specific window about moral injury and all the resources. Take advantage of the COVID-19 freebies, because right now all this stuff is going to be free probably for another year. So I highly recommend it if you have interest in this arena to go and explore it. But it's very interesting, very intense, but it is one more offering that we can provide our aging veterans to let them live in peace and without guilt the rest of the life that God has designed for all of them. So in the next slide, you're going to see some of the links that are available to you. And I'm sure you're going to receive the PowerPoint presentation, but also if you go directly, as I mentioned, to our website, you can find all of them directly. And again, find my contact information. I take calls directly in my personal cell phone, and I'll be more than willing to navigate you with what we have to offer on behalf of all the great veterans that are serve our country. So thank you again for this opportunity, and stay tuned.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you for that information, and thank you to all of our panelists, speakers today. We've got some good feedback. I think I've got a couple of people commenting that they're interested in the training that you mentioned, Janet. So yeah, if you will share the link that way. I asked a question to our attendants or our audience that's in attendance just a second ago about where they're having difficulty serving aging veterans. So we'll start there to kind of prompt discussion, and then we'll move on to some questions if anything else comes in. So one of our attendees mentioned they're having challenges increasing their income for aging veterans. So aside from HVRP and those employment services, are there any other resources for a sustainable living wage income if subsidized housing is not available? Not entirely sure. I think Ashton, we're missing you back in the video. And then anybody can chime in. It's not directed at any one person, but anybody have any tips on connecting aging veterans to employment resources?
I saw a comment about being very hard to find housing for our aging homeless veterans. So again, it's not my organization. I should get paid at this point, Molly, for this, but call the AAA. Just remember about your other AAA that takes you out of trouble when you are stranded in the road. I think this AAA does the same thing, and they will help you navigate those veterans.
Yeah, there are through different funding sources, but there are they're called senior employment services, so that really specialize in older workers and some of the challenges that they can face in terms of getting jobs. The other idea that comes to mind, and I'm not a direct service provider, so want to acknowledge the limitations of my expertise here, but one additional idea would be to try and help those veterans who need and are looking to make a more sustainable living wage. If there's a way to connect them with volunteer opportunities so that anyway, they have a place that can make a good reference, or they're connected to a network. And sometimes we know volunteer positions do evolve into job offers. So one idea.
I forgot this commercial, but since someone asked a question in the chat box, at Volunteers of America, Florida, we also have a mobile unit that travels any place across the state of Florida. Now, this is for Florida only guests, but maybe there are others in the state, to do some light to medium home repairs to keep our veterans in place and to avoid for them to have to go to a nursing home and ALF. And that includes, make a ramp for them, some roofing, help them with the landscape, install bars in their showers. So I know we do it for the state of Florida, but there might be other providers across the nation that might be doing it. We do it in partnership with the Home Depot Foundation, who has a great commitment to serve our veterans. So that's something that we can do, as well as we would like our veterans to age in place if possible.
And just to add to that, we have done work with our partners to get veterans help with a one-shot deal to help them out in desperate times, just to like get caught up on rent, so they could stay where they're living as well. And we've also been able to make referrals to great agencies and organizations like Black Veterans for Social Justice, who have helped out with some housing issues some of our veterans had. And also there's always the option for looking into benefits and compensation for injuries, and whether they're physical or mental injuries that a veteran has sustained during their time of service. And you can get help with that from benefits counselors at your state Division of Veteran Services, or agencies like Sage Vets, or programs like Sage Vets, or similar programs.
Great. Okay. I mean, I would encourage everybody to check out the chat box. A lot of people are dropping resources in, both for housing and employment. So that's great. We can all kind of share tips and stuff with each other. A comment I saw was discussing veterans who receive fixed incomes, and it's still not enough to make ends meet. We too experience that a lot on our hotline or helpline for veterans, where they're over income for most of the programs, but still living in poverty and like can't be served by existing programs. So any tips for serving veterans who fall into that category?
This year, because of the CARES Act, there might be something temporary that could help, and you will have to probably contact the Department of Children and Families of your state and try to see to whom they have given those funds. It could be the managing entities. So this is the year to get some help, but overall, that's a tough one. You might have to find very specific providers, but for the next year, you might have give a shot to the CARES Act providers.
And just an additional suggestion would be to call the AAA, call the Title VI program, to just be connected to, while they may not be able to help per se in terms of the income, but making sure that if there are, providing that assistance with getting access, enrolling, applying for benefits to help round out and meet some of those other needs.
Great. Okay. I did see one comment that was in relation to veterans maybe being placed in GPD housing or participating in the grant per diem program that don't necessarily fit in with the grant and per diem program. We too get calls like this where it seems like maybe senior veterans or aging veterans were mismatched to programs. So is there a way, I guess, that we can help connect veterans to somebody who can maybe do like a better assessment at that point, or make the determination to better match people with a housing, whether that be in a supportive environment or independent living? I would,
oh, go ahead.
go ahead.
Okay. I know for, at least in terms of people who are on Medicaid, that there are increased resources this year for home and community-based services, which can help in terms of, providing additional assistance that may be needed to transition back into a different type of community setting. So again, that, for Medicaid beneficiaries, that might be an additional, it might be easier to get that or to apply for, in some states, a program called Money Follows the Person, where the financial assistance that it supports being in that setting can follow the person out of that into a housing of his or her choice, and being able to access the services that they need to be independent.
All right. And then there was one other comment I received. I'm trying to scroll back to it, but I think it was about veterans living in shared housing with mental health disabilities and multiple like compounding issues maybe going on. And outside of veterans and connecting them to VA healthcare, do you guys have any other resources or I guess ways to address that type of issue if maybe they're not seeing that or not open to receiving that kind of help?
Jasmine, that's a very sensitive issue for the population I work with. A lot are very wary of going to the VA. However, the VA is most equipped for addressing mental health issues for vets. But again, every VA has a LGBT veteran care coordinator to help sort of help an LGBT veteran navigate their way through some of these resources. But there are also other avenues. There's a program at NYU, this one at Columbia, who offers some really solid mental health support. And they've been doing it virtually over the last couple of years. So we've been able to take advantage of those resources and get people connected. But again, you got to find the right provider and the right program, because understanding a veteran isn't something that every mental health provider knows how to do. And then when you've got the added layer of being LGBT and having a whole different experience, sometimes that can require a little bit more finessing as well.
Right, okay. I haven't seen any more comments come in, and I don't think I missed anything, but if I did, send it in quickly so we can all see it. If no other comments, I'm gonna let you guys kind of close this out. If y'all have any final comments, once again, everybody in attendance, you will receive this recording and also slides, so you can go back and check out the links that were shared with you all, but I'll go ahead and let our panelists close this out with any final comments.
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity. And it was wonderful to learn about SAGE vets and also Volunteers of America. And just, but I especially appreciated hearing the dialogue. So thank you so much and to you, Jasmine and David.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm going to echo what Molly said. Really nice to get connected within CHV. And I hope this will continue. Thanks for the great work you're doing.
I just want to again express our gratitude to all of you, the providers, the ones who are really in the trenches doing your magic. I know we were going to be preaching to the choir, so I hope that we added some extra offerings and things that you didn't know before, or at least to know a little bit more about us and how we can help you do your job. So God bless you all, and thank you for all that you do every day.
All right, well, thank you guys all for participating. Thank you to our attendees for sitting in, and we will see you guys the rest of this week. Y'all have a great afternoon, okay? Bye.